She laughed and said, "I'm old enough to be your mother." I smiled back, "Good. Maybe that means you'll finally know what I need." Neither of us realized how true that would become, or how much it would change us both. She said it with a laugh, light, teasing, unguarded, the kind of laugh that slips out before a person remembers to protect themselves. "I'm old enough to be your mother." It should have been just a joke, something tossed between strangers to keep things simple. But something about the way her voice lingered on mother made it sound more like a confession than a defense. And before I could stop myself, I smiled and said the words that seemed to come from somewhere older, quieter, braver than I'd ever been. "Good," I told her. "You'll know exactly what I need." The silence that followed didn't feel awkward, it felt alive. Like the air itself had slowed down to listen. We'd met earlier that evening at a small art exhibit downtown, one of those quiet spaces where music hums softly and people speak in half-whispers as if afraid to disturb the colors on the walls. I was there helping a friend set up, and she'd come to support her niece, a young painter whose work filled the back corner of the room. When I saw her, she wasn't trying to stand out. She was standing by a painting, a woman's silhouette under rain, her arms crossed gently, her fingers brushing her own wrist like she was feeling the rhythm of something only she could hear. Her hair was dark with hints of silver under the light, not from age but from experience, that quiet kind that doesn't need to prove anything anymore. Our first words were about art, but they weren't really. I asked her what she thought of the painting. She said it looked like a woman waiting for someone who'd never come back, but still too proud to admit it. There was something about the way she said waiting, soft, almost wistful, that made me realize she wasn't just talking about the painting. When our hands brushed as we stepped aside for someone passing, she pulled hers back quickly, a polite smile covering a flicker of something else, surprise maybe, or recognition. I wanted to apologize, but she shook her head slightly as if saying don't. Later, we found ourselves outside on the gallery steps. The night air was cool and the city lights stretched like quiet stars along the street. That's when she said it, the joke about being old enough to be my mother. And that's when I answered without thinking. She looked at me then, really looked, and for the first time her laughter faded into something unspoken. I didn't know what to call it yet, but I felt it, a shift. The kind that happens when two people realize they've both been pretending they're fine, and suddenly, they don't have to. She changed the subject, asked where I worked, what I did for fun, but her tone had softened. And when we said goodnight, she hesitated, not long, just enough to make me notice. As she walked away, her perfume lingered, faint jasmine and rain. It stayed with me all the way home, and for reasons I couldn't explain, I found myself hoping I'd see her again. Not because she was older, or beautiful, though she was both, but because for the first time in years, someone had looked at me and seen me. And that felt like something worth waiting for. I didn't expect to see her again. Weeks had passed since that night at the gallery, yet her voice, that quiet mix of grace and guarded warmth, kept echoing in my head. I'd told myself it was nothing, that people like her didn't linger in the lives of people like me. She seemed too put together, too self-assured, like someone who'd learned to survive heartbreaks and still walk away with poise. But life has a strange way of looping back when you least expect it. It happened on a Sunday morning, at a little cafe tucked between a bookstore and a flower shop. I went there for the coffee, but mostly for the stillness. I was halfway through my usual order when I heard that same low laugh from behind me, the one that had somehow branded itself into my memory. I turned, and there she was, standing by the counter in a soft beige sweater, hair loosely tied, reading glasses perched on her head. Her eyes caught mine before I could look away. That knowing smile appeared, half amusement, half disbelief. "Well," she said, "looks like the universe didn't get your memo." I laughed, trying to sound casual, but inside everything shifted again, that same quiet pause between words, like the space right before rain begins to fall. She joined me at my table after a gentle insistence, and for the first few minutes, we pretended it was just coincidence. But the air between us told a different story. She stirred her coffee slowly, tracing the rim of the cup with her fingertip. You ever feel like some people show up in your life to test how ready you are for something real? She asked. I nodded, though I wasn't sure if she was asking me or herself. There was a sadness in her eyes, soft but present, like an echo of a wound long healed but not forgotten. She told me she'd been divorced for a few years. It's strange, she said, her gaze distant. You can be surrounded by people, and still feel unseen. Those words landed somewhere deep inside me. I didn't try to fix it, didn't offer comfort or cliché, just listened. And for some reason, that silence seemed to mean more to her than any reassurance could have. When she finally looked at me again, there was something unspoken in her expression, recognition, maybe. Like she'd just realized we were both a little lost, and maybe that was okay. As we talked, time slipped by unnoticed. The coffee went cold, sunlight shifted across her face, and with every quiet laugh, every thoughtful pause, I felt something unfolding, slow, hesitant, inevitable. Before leaving, she placed her hand lightly on mine, almost instinctively. It was brief, just a brush of warmth, but it sent a pulse through my chest that words couldn't hold. She withdrew her hand just as quickly, her composure returning, though her eyes gave her away. Next time, she said softly, you're buying. And just like that, she was gone again, leaving behind that faint trace of jasmine, and a feeling I couldn't quite name. Walking home, I realized I didn't just want to see her again. I needed to. Not out of infatuation, but because every moment near her felt like being reminded of something I'd forgotten. That connection doesn't ask for permission, it just quietly happens. And this, whatever it was, had already begun. After that morning at the cafe, our paths started crossing more often, though we both pretended it was accidental. Some days she'd be sitting near the window, lost in a book, and I'd happen to pass by. Other days I'd already be there, hoping she'd walk in. Eventually, we stopped pretending. She'd smile when she saw me, that small, knowing curve of her lips that carried more warmth than words ever could. Sometimes we'd talk for hours, other times we'd simply sit in comfortable silence, the hum of conversation around us fading into background noise. There was something easy about her presence, like the world quieted down just enough to let me breathe. But under that calmness was a slow current neither of us mentioned. It showed itself in small things, the way her hand would linger a second longer when she passed me my cup, or the way her laugh softened when I looked at her too long. I could feel it building between us, that unspoken awareness that made the air feel heavier, sweeter. She told me little things about her life, not everything, but enough. Her work in publishing, her love for quiet mornings, her niece's art. She spoke of growing older like someone who'd made peace with it, yet there were moments when her voice faltered, when her eyes searched mine for something she didn't name. Once, she asked, do you ever feel like you met someone too late? I remember answering carefully, maybe not too late. Maybe just when you've learned what to do with them. She didn't respond right away. Just looked at me, long enough that I felt something inside me shift again, like a tide turning. That evening, we walked along the riverside. The city lights shimmered over the water, and the air smelled faintly of rain. She walked close enough that her shoulder brushed against mine every few steps, and neither of us moved away. It wasn't bold, it wasn't reckless, it was something quieter. Intentional. When she laughed, she tilted her head slightly, her hair brushing my arm. I wanted to reach out, to tuck that strand behind her ear, but I didn't. The restraint made it ache even more. She stopped walking at one point, turning to face the water. You know, she said softly, I haven't let anyone this close in a long time. I didn't answer with words, I just stepped beside her, letting the silence speak. My hand brushed hers, and this time, she didn't pull away. Her fingers rested lightly against mine, tentative at first, then sure, steady. It wasn't about possession or desire, it was about recognition. The kind that happens when two people realize their walls are the same height, built for the same reasons. When she finally looked up at me, her eyes reflected both fear and relief. You make me feel young again, she whispered, almost like an apology. I smiled. You make me feel like I've finally caught up. We stood there for a long while, saying nothing more. Just two people who'd found a strange kind of stillness in a world that never stopped moving. And in that quiet, under city lights, by the slow river, I knew this wasn't just chance anymore. It was something neither of us had planned for, and neither of us could walk away from. For a while, everything felt weightless, effortless. We'd fallen into a rhythm neither of us dared to name. Mornings at the cafe, walks that stretched into the evening, quiet talks about everything and nothing. But the closer we got, the more she began to pull away, gently at first, like someone retreating into a room they weren't sure they should have entered. It started with small things. A text left unanswered for a day. A postponed coffee. A glance that didn't quite linger as long. I told myself she was busy, that life gets in the way. But deep down, I knew, this was fear. Not of me, but of what being with me might mean for her. When we finally met again, I could see it in her eyes, that careful distance. She looked beautiful, but guarded, her smile practiced. We sat at our usual spot by the window, but something between us had shifted. You're quiet today, I said. She looked down, tracing the rim of her cup with her fingertip. I've just been thinking, she said softly. Maybe this, whatever it is, isn't fair to you. Her voice trembled on the last word. I leaned forward slightly, trying to meet her gaze. Unfair how? She hesitated, then sighed. You're young. You have a whole life ahead of you, people your age, choices that make sense. And me, she gave a short, humorless laugh. I make jokes about being old enough to be your mother, but the truth is, sometimes it feels like I'm just reminding myself not to forget the math. I wanted to tell her that I didn't care, that what I felt had nothing to do with numbers or what people might think. But there was something fragile in her tone, a quiet panic that logic couldn't fix. I don't want to hold you back, she said. Or make you regret something later. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. The room felt smaller, her words echoing between us like gentle warnings. Then, without thinking, I reached out and touched her hand, a simple, steady gesture. Her fingers tensed, then slowly relaxed under mine. You don't hold me back, I said quietly. You remind me to be present. That's not something I regret. She looked up then, eyes glistening with something between gratitude and ache. For a heartbeat, it felt like she might let the walls fall. But instead, she smiled faintly, that sad, practiced smile again, and withdrew her hand. Maybe we both need some air, she whispered. Outside, she walked me to the corner, her steps slower than usual. We said goodbye like we were rehearsing for distance, polite, calm, careful. But the moment she turned away, the ache hit like silence after music. That night, I lay awake replaying every look, every pause, every almost. She was scared, not of what she felt, but of being seen feeling it. And maybe that was the cruel part about love at this stage of life, it demanded courage from wounds that hadn't yet healed. Still, somewhere deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. People don't retreat from something that means nothing. She was pulling away, yes, but only because she felt it too deeply to take lightly. And love, I was beginning to learn, sometimes hides behind fear before it learns how to stay. Days turned into weeks, and she stayed quiet. No texts. No coffee meetings. No chance encounters. The absence of her presence began to ache like a dull, steady bruise, not sharp enough to break me, but impossible to ignore. Every morning, I'd find myself walking by that cafe window, half hoping, half dreading to see her there. Each time, the chair she once sat in stayed empty. It felt strange how a single person could change the temperature of your days. The light seemed different without her laughter somewhere in it. One late afternoon, the sky turned gray and restless. The first drops of rain began to fall, and before I realized it, my feet had led me toward the art gallery, the place where it all began. Maybe I just wanted to feel the echo of her somewhere again. The gallery was quiet, the same soft music playing. I was about to leave when I saw her, standing before that same painting of the woman in the rain. Same spot. Same stillness. It felt like time had folded back on itself. She turned when she heard my footsteps, her expression unreadable for a moment before softening into something like resignation. "I thought you might stop coming," she said. "I tried," I admitted. "Didn't work." A faint smile tugged at her lips, but her eyes betrayed exhaustion, not from me, but from fighting something she didn't know how to name. "I wasn't avoiding you," she said quietly. "I was trying to convince myself that what I felt wasn't real. That it would fade if I stayed away." I stepped closer, the rain tapping softly against the tall windows beside us. "And did it?" She shook her head, almost laughing. "No. It just made me realize how real it actually was." The air between us grew heavier, the space shrinking. She looked up at me then, her eyes glistening, not with tears, but with the weight of honesty. "I was scared," she said. "Not of you. Of being seen again. Of letting someone close enough to notice the lines, the mistakes, the parts of me I thought time had already taken." Her voice trembled, and before she could look away, I reached out, slowly, giving her every chance to step back. She didn't. My hand found hers, cold from the rain. I held it gently, letting warmth replace apology. "You don't need to hide from me," I whispered. "I didn't fall for perfection. I fell for the way you make silence feel safe." Her eyes met mine, and for the first time, she didn't look away. She stepped forward, closing the space between us. I could feel her breath, soft and unsteady, the scent of jasmine and rain surrounding us. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. There was no need. Every unsent message, every missed call, every night of quiet longing found its voice in that stillness. Then she rested her forehead lightly against my chest, her voice a whisper that barely reached me. "I don't know where this goes," she said. "I just know I don't want to keep pretending I don't feel it." My arms wrapped around her, not to claim, but to steady. Outside, the rain kept falling, but inside, everything felt clear again. Sometimes love doesn't arrive with fireworks or grand gestures. Sometimes it just returns, quietly, drenched, trembling, asking to be let back in. After that night in the gallery, something between us shifted, not dramatically, but quietly, like dawn slowly breaking through a long, sleepless night. The tension that had once filled every silence was now replaced by something gentler, steadier. We didn't need to name what we were, we simply began to be. We met often, but without planning to. Sometimes at the cafe, sometimes on long evening walks through the park where the world seemed to soften around us. She'd bring her camera, taking photos of small, unremarkable things, a half-empty bench, a trail of fallen leaves, a reflection in a puddle. She said she liked how ordinary moments became beautiful when you really looked. Maybe that's what she was teaching me, to look closer. At her, at life, at the quiet ways affection hides in the smallest gestures. There were moments when her hand would brush mine as we walked, and neither of us would pull away. Moments when she'd lean into me as laughter overtook her, her head resting briefly against my shoulder, and I'd feel the faint weight of her trust pressing gently against my chest. No grand declarations, no promises, just small, consistent truths that felt more real than any confession could. But beneath that calm, there was still a soft undercurrent of uncertainty, a quiet awareness that the world outside our small circle might not understand. Sometimes, when we sat together in the cafe, she'd glance around before reaching for her cup, as if remembering that what felt natural to us might look unusual to others. Once, as we walked by the river, she said, "People will talk." I smiled. "Let them. They'll get bored eventually." She looked at me then, amusement flickering through her eyes. "You say that now. Wait until someone asks if I'm your aunt." I laughed, but the words carried a hint of truth. Still, I didn't flinch. Then I'll tell them I'm just lucky she's not. Her laughter came soft but genuine, her eyes lighting up like they hadn't in a long time. It wasn't about defiance, it was about peace, two people finding their rhythm despite the noise outside it. There were nights we'd cook together in her small apartment, the scent of garlic and rosemary filling the space. She'd hum quietly as she moved around the kitchen, barefoot, her hair loose. I'd catch myself watching her in the reflection of the window, how effortlessly she carried herself, how her presence felt like home. When she caught me staring once, she didn't tease me. She just smiled and said, "You look at me like I'm a secret you're trying not to tell." I didn't answer. I just reached over, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, and whispered, "Maybe I am." That night, we sat side by side on the couch, her head against my shoulder, the city lights spilling faintly through the curtains. No music, no words, just the sound of our breathing sinking into the same rhythm. For the first time, she didn't look away when I met her gaze. There was no fear in her eyes now, only the quiet acceptance of someone who'd stopped running from what was already hers. Love, I realized, doesn't always demand promises. Sometimes, it just asks you to stay long enough to believe it's real. Seasons changed quietly around us. What started as a hesitant connection had grown into something steady, unspoken, and deeply alive. We didn't chase excitement anymore, we cherished calm, the kind that comes when two people stop doubting what they already know. The world didn't stop asking questions, of course. Sometimes her friends teased her in that half-playful, half-judging way. Sometimes my coworkers raised their eyebrows when I mentioned her name. But neither of us explained ourselves anymore. There comes a point when love doesn't need defending, it just needs to be lived. She once said, "It still surprises me, that you stayed." We were sitting on her balcony that evening, a soft breeze carrying the scent of rain-soaked jasmine from below. She had her knees drawn up, a blanket over her legs, a mug of tea cradled in her hands. The city lights shimmered faintly on her face, revealing the soft traces of years she used to hide but no longer did. "I didn't stay," I told her. "I just never left." She looked at me for a long time after that, not with disbelief, but with quiet understanding. Then she reached across the small table and rested her hand on mine. Her fingers were warm, sure, and gentle, the way you touch something you've finally decided not to fear losing. In that moment, I realized love doesn't always arrive to change your life, sometimes it just teaches you to see it differently. To slow down. To notice the details, the way someone sighs before they laugh, the way their presence changes the air around you. We began to build small rituals together. Sunday mornings meant coffee on her balcony. Wednesday evenings were for walking by the river, no matter the weather. It wasn't about the time we spent, but the rhythm we kept, unspoken promises woven into ordinary moments. There were still nights when doubt would flicker in her eyes. She'd look at me with that familiar worry, about the years between us, about the world outside our quiet space. But every time, I'd take her hand and say, "It's just time. And I'd rather spend mine with you." One night, as we watched the rain fall against her window, she leaned into me and whispered, "You know, I used to think love was something that happened in your 20s, all fire and recklessness. But this feels different." "How?" I asked. She smiled softly, tracing circles on my arm with her fingertip. "It feels like peace." I kissed her forehead, slow, steady, and felt her exhale against my chest, her body relaxing into mine. It wasn't the thrill of newness anymore, it was the warmth of belonging. When I left that night, the rain had stopped. The streets glistened under the lamplight, and the world felt strangely still. I realized I wasn't walking away from her, I was walking towards something lasting. Because some loves don't shout to be heard. They whisper. They wait. They unfold quietly in the spaces between fear and faith, until one day, you realize you're no longer reaching for each other, because you've already arrived. And in that simple truth, in her laughter, her steady hand, her soft good night, I found everything I didn't even know I was searching for. If this story touched something quiet in you, that part of the heart that still believes in slow love, in connection that grows rather than burns, then stay a little longer with us. Subscribe for more stories like this one, stories that remind you it's never too late to feel something real. And if you've ever met someone who made time stand still, someone who saw you before you were ready to be seen, leave a crescent moon in the comments. Let's see how many of us still believe that real love doesn't rush, it arrives when it's meant to.